Hey there, amazing friends. I warmly invite you to join me on this exciting journey by subscribing to my channel, liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. Every like, comment, and share brings us closer together and fuels my passion to create more great content. Your support truly makes all the difference. Thank you for being the heart of this community. Blood sent accompanied by the clank of chains, the entity moaning under its own will behind the locked cellar door. A damp wind breathes through the old estate's overgrown courtyard, rattling the dead leaves strewn across its cracked cobblestones. The estate stands in partial ruin, battered by centuries of storms, neglect, and what some call curses that trace back to a time no one wishes to remember. It is a massive structure of weathered stone and wrought iron gates, perched on a lonely plot of land where only the persistent gloom of twilight seems to thrive. Ancestral gargoyles adorn the roof, chipped and disfigured by the elements, their grimacing faces scanning the horizon as if to warn intruders. Rarely do travelers pass by, for tales of savage moans and the acrid smell of blood drifting from its interior are enough to keep all but the most reckless from approaching. Yet for the small, scattered population that resides in the region, the estate's black silhouette on the horizon is a constant reminder of a dreadful secret sealed behind a cellar door that no one dares to unbolt. Some, in hushed voices, refer to it simply as the chamber, while others call it the chain's lair. But beneath all names and rumors, one detail remains consistent. Each time night envelops the estate, a faint clank of chains echoes from deep within its bowels, accompanied by the metallic tang of blood on the wind and the low, agonized moaning of something that is neither fully dead nor truly alive. The estate once belonged to the Mornavel family, an ancient lineage rumored to have wielded arcane knowledge and dabbling in forbidden lore. The earliest records speak of a patriarch, Lord Rendell Mornavel, who was both revered and feared for his experiments in unnatural sciences. Officially, he was an alchemist, searching for ways to purify metals and discover hidden elements that would cement the family's fortune. But from scraps of diaries and partial confessions by old servants, it seems he ventured into darker pursuits, rumored attempts at reanimation, or bridging the thresholds between life and death. Over generations, each descendant contributed to the estate's labyrinthine expansions, several wings of living quarters, a library rumored to hold rare grimoires, hidden passageways that led to locked chambers, and a labyrinthine cellar that extended deeper into the earth than any rational blueprint could explain. Over time, the family line dwindled, marred by tragedy, each generation's misfortunes fueling speculation that the Mornavels were cursed or had meddled with forces beyond mortal comprehension. Decades passed, and eventually, the last known Mornavel, an ailing lord lacking heirs, vanished without explanation. By then, the estate had decayed into a bleak monument to defiled knowledge and despair. Though abandoned to rot, the building wasn't always silent. Neighbors occupying a farm a half-mile away often reported hearing clanging metal in the dead of night, echoing across the fields. On certain nights, they also smelled a coppery odor that carried on the winds, faint but unmistakable, the smell of fresh blood. The phenomenon repeated without pattern. Some nights were eerily quiet, others racked with savage wailing that made livestock restless and coaxed local dogs into frantic barking. Attempts by the local pastor and a ragtag group of townsmen to investigate ended in failure, as many found themselves consumed by inexplicable dread upon stepping onto the estate's grounds. The gloom beneath the archways felt nearly tangible, and within moments, candle flames flickered out, lanterns dimmed, courage evaporated. The men retreated, vowing never to return. The estate thus became a forbidden zone, a place of dire rumor rather than open inquiry. Occasionally would be explorers, perhaps adventurous travelers or occult enthusiasts, arrived, determined to find the source of the moaning. All left unsettled or in near hysterics. A minority never re-emerged, fueling even darker legends. Somewhere in the labyrinth of cold stone corridors stands a simple but imposing wooden door, locked and reinforced with steel plating. Its old keyhole is sealed with melted lead. Chains crisscross it from top to bottom, each link thick with rust, as if forging an unbreakable barrier. No plaque or label identifies this cellar door, but local legends name it as the locus of the entire estate's haunting presence. Some say the door was sealed by the final caretaker centuries ago to contain a monstrous entity. Others believe the occupant behind that door is not monstrous, but pitiful, someone or something cursed to exist in perpetual agony. The door's exterior is spattered with dark stains that might be ancient wine or dried gore. No one can say for certain. The air near it is said to feel colder by several degrees, and an intangible weight presses on the chest of anyone who approaches. On nights of the full moon or under heavy storms, those standing near the door claim to hear faint scraping from the other side, followed by the rattle of heavy chains, and culminating in a wet, ragged breathing that escalates into a moan. Observers describe the moan as heartbreakingly human one second and guttural or bestial the next. The stench in those moments, they say, is reminiscent of old blood, copper, and decay. That combination of chain clank and the metallic smell forms the hallmark of the estate's terror. The question that has haunted locals for generations is, what or who is locked behind the cellar door? And more disturbingly, does it remain there by force or by its own twisted choice? The old Mornavel diaries discovered in a rotting trunk decades ago yield partial clues. One entry, penned in spidery handwriting, believed to be from Lord Rendell's granddaughter, Lady Alicia Mornavel, references the shapeless occupant in the lower vault and laments the torment of feeding it. Another entry mentions a complex experiment to stall the boundary between mortal life and the darkness beyond. She writes of an abomination that bleeds eternally, yet never perishes. These cryptic lines imply that the occupant might be the result of an unholy experiment gone awry. The diaries also mention how the occupant must be kept under lock and chain, for if it ever escaped, it would seek vengeance or draw the entire family into a catastrophic doom. The last few diary pages become increasingly incoherent, referencing nightmares, a malignant presence whispering in the corridors, and a demand for fresh sustenance. Then the entries cease altogether. Over the centuries, some clandestine attempts have been made to break into the cellar. Perhaps the intruders wanted to unravel the mystery, or perhaps they sought dark power rumored to dwell within. Those attempts typically ended in fiasco. In one well-known 19th century account, 3 occult enthusiasts hammered at the chains until they snapped one link, but before they could pry open the door, something from inside pounded on the wood with such force that splinters rained down. A single screech tore through the air, driving them away in terror. They abandoned the estate entirely, leaving behind their tools. Locals discovered these tools the next day, lined with fresh blood. Another story from the early 20th century describes how a traveling mystic claimed he could banish the entity by performing a midnight rite. However, once the mystic arrived and chanted his incantations near the cellar door, the chain clanking escalated, followed by a dripping noise that spattered near his feet, though no visible source of the fluid could be seen. The mystic, pale and unnerved, ended the ritual prematurely and fled without explanation. This repeated pattern of thwarted entry has yielded an unspoken consensus among the superstitious. It's best left sealed. Whatever horrors might be behind that door, they remain contained by the chain. Yet, ironically, The moaning and the blood scent that emerges unbidden suggests that the occupant is not completely powerless. Some interpret the phenomenon as the occupant's attempt to call out, to lure unsuspecting intruders to break the barrier. The moaning, they say, has grown more desperate over the centuries, as if the occupant begs to be freed from a monstrous existence. Others see it as a cunning ploy. If someone unlatches the door out of pity, they unleash an ancient evil. One can't discount the possibility that the occupant is simultaneously a victim and a predator. Such dualities arise often in Gothic lore, but here, the tangible evidence of chain rattling and the metallic smell suggests something physically present and physically horrifying. The deeper question remains: does the occupant sustain itself on blood? The diaries and a handful of cryptic local anecdotes hint that occasionally fresh blood must be offered. One local legend tells how once every decade, an unknown caretaker or a disguised member of the Mornavel lineage returns to the estate under cloak of darkness. They carry with them a small goat or a stray animal, entering the cellar to feed the occupant. The screams of the animal are muffled, lost behind stone walls. The caretaker emerges at dawn, leaving behind fresh chains or new runic carvings meant to reinforce the seal. Is this just a tall tale to explain the sporadic signs of forced entry or replaced locks? Possibly. But some farmers who have lost livestock near the estate's boundaries point to a pattern aligning with these rumored decennial visits. The question is, who is orchestrating this unholy practice? Are there any Mornavel descendants left at all, or has the duty passed to some obscure cult that worships the occupant as a dark deity? Multiple ghost hunters and paranormal vloggers in the modern era have tried to film behind the house's rotten walls, seeking viral fame. Their typical approach involves creeping around the estate, shining flickering flashlights, capturing orbs or unexplained shadow movements, and inevitably focusing on the locked cellar door. The documented phenomena are consistent. As the group nears the door, an overwhelming stench of blood emerges, as if fresh copper-laced air seeps through the cracks. Then the chain clank rings out, an echoing metallic rattle that sends the vloggers into fits of panic. Some claim to hear a voice softly calling names, though no consistent word can be made out. Usually, the door remains sealed, no matter how bold they get. If they attempt to pry or test the lock, they are greeted by a powerful blow from the other side or a sudden hideous moan, prompting immediate retreat. They typically end the night with shaky camera footage and streaming tears. Online debates ignite afterward. Some watchers call it staged. Others see raw fear in the explorer's eyes. But the net effect is the same. The legend intensifies, and the occupant's existence is perpetuated in digital rumor as well as local tradition. Those who have spent hours analyzing the moans on recorded audio claim the frequency is a combination of low-pitched groans akin to a large wounded animal, interspersed with shrill undertones reminiscent of a human's wail in pain. If it's a ruse, it's an unnervingly well-crafted one. If it's real, it implies a being bridging the boundary of monstrous and human. The presence of chains suggests it either must be tethered for safety, or else it actively uses them in some twisted routine. Another perplexing element is the mention of self-inflicted clanking. Some nights, watchers see no external disturbance, yet the occupant apparently rattles its own chains violently, as if performing a macabre lament. The repeated mention of blood or the sense of spilled fluid emerges as well, fueling the idea that the occupant might be wounded or dependent on fresh blood to remain half alive. Speculative historians propose that the occupant might be an immortal form conjured by the Mornavel's dark experiments, perhaps an ancestor or a victim forcibly transformed. If so, the occupant's moan might be that of a once human soul, now trapped in unending torment. The mention of the entity moaning under its own will in local lore underscores that it's not a mindless zombie or spectral imprint, but a conscious being of some twisted form, aware of its chains yet powerless to break them, unless lured by an unwitting intruder. That detail, at once pitiful and horrifying, resonates strongly with the region's folklore about monstrous secrets that started as misguided attempts at immortality. Indeed, a scattered set of arcane references discovered in the estate's library, though mostly lost, makes vague mention of transferring life force from living donors to a single vessel, granting it endless continuity. Perhaps that vessel is now locked away, spitting out its agony each night. Weaving this entire mosaic together, the estate stands as a testament to the extremes of human meddling with forces we cannot fully master. The occupant, call it an abomination or a cursed soul, reflects the tragic consequence of such meddling. If the occupant indeed was once a person, its continued moans and the reek of blood highlight that its unnatural existence offers only ceaseless torment. Meanwhile, the caretaker's role, seldom glimpsed yet rumored, speaks to the unbroken chain of complicity, maintaining the occupant's captivity across centuries. This pattern suggests an undertow of dread lying dormant in every rural corner where ancient lineages once practiced esoteric crafts. The house itself, battered and near collapse, might not last another few decades. If it falls, will the occupant be freed, or will it remain pinned by the rubble, moaning in darkness? The thought chills all who contemplate it. Occasionally, the community wonders if demolishing the house, exploding it outright, would end the haunting. But attempts at that are universally stymied. The local government never organizes the funds. Private developers vanish after bizarre accidents or run-ins with the occupant's presence. On some level, the region has resigned to letting it stand, a quiet menace that no one wants to disturb. That standoff cements the legend, ensuring it remains untested. For those traveling near the estate at twilight, they say you might sense a building tension in the air, culminating as the sun sinks. Right around dusk, a faint scraping or sigh emerges from inside, the prelude to the nightly moan that is almost a ritual in its predictability. But it is near midnight when the dread peaks, as if the occupant stirs fully, rattling chains and flooding the corridors with a thick scent of copper. Then, come morning, the hush returns, leaving only the building's sagging shape in the daylight as evidence of the prior night's horror. To step into that place is to confront the possibility that something far beyond normal existence can linger, half chained, half liberated, fed by the cyclical energies of fear and blood. For all the terror, there is a flicker of empathy. Is the occupant truly malevolent, or simply an eternal prisoner longing for release? The diaries hint that it might have been forced into this state, an experiment gone gruesomely wrong. The occupant's moan, then, could be an agonized plea. Yet, if we are to believe the caretaker rumors, it also demands or thirsts for blood. Perhaps it has become a monstrous predator in spirit, if not in full physical motion. The notion of it under its own will, moaning, underscores that it retains consciousness, presumably raging at its predicament or lashing out at the world that shuttered it away. That entire moral ambiguity forms the black heart of the legend. The occupant is both victim and monster, caged in a dance of chain rattles, moans, and the pungent swirl of blood scent at each new cycle of night. Across the years, no shortage of writers, historians, or even production companies have mulled turning the property story into a major novel or film. But attempts to film on site typically unravel due to unexplained technical failures, accidents on set, or crew members swoop into quitting. This repeated fiasco suggests the occupant or the estate exudes an intangible aura of sabotage, preventing any polished mainstream retelling. The story thus remains in the domain of whispered lore, scattered blog posts, or underground documentaries that never fully break beyond niche interest. Local children, inevitably curious, still test each other with dares. Go stand near the locked cellar door at midnight, see if you can last 5 minutes. The few who try rarely manage more than a minute, describing a paralyzing sense of being watched by something malicious yet heartbreakingly lost behind the door. Some suspect if they waited longer, the occupant's moaning might crystallize into a voice calling their name, an utterly horrifying thought that no child or adult is prepared to face. And so the story continues, a twilight menace in an obscure rural nook of the world. The moans and chain clanks remain nightly constants, unbroken by rational explanation or exorcism. The reek of fresh blood, intangible but unmistakable, rolls over the property's threshold, dissipating into the open fields by morning. Many stand convinced that eventually some cataclysm, be it the final collapse of the cellar or some shift in the caretaker's arrangement, will bring the occupant to roam free. Others hope that day never comes, for fear of what an entity that has endured centuries of torture and thirst might unleash upon the living. In either scenario, blood scent accompanied by the clank of chains, the entity moaning under its own will behind the locked cellar door, stands as the estate's rightful epitaph, a testament to a horror that no one, not even time, has dared to resolve. Should one find themselves drawn to that place, the final caution is to heed the stale, metallic tang in the air. If it grows strong and the chain's clank echoes from below, it is best to leave while you can. Some mysteries are not meant to be unraveled, and some locked doors are sealed for reasons more dire than curiosity can handle. Under the moon's pale stare, with the moan echoing from below, any illusions of bravery or rational science can crumble. The occupant, drenched in an existence of torment or monstrous appetite, calls out only for the living to come closer so that it may share its doom or feed its hunger. To linger is to risk more than fear. It is to invite a brush with a darkness older than reason and more unrelenting than death. Thus ends the tale, suspended in perpetual twilight, as the clank of chains resonates across the gloom, and the blood scent drifts on the wind, waiting for yet another midnight visitor who will not remain unscathed.